Greetings, everybody, to my presentation titled Models of Disability to Inform Approaches to Therapy and Ethics, presented at Arsha, April 22nd, 2022. Let me first introduce myself and state my purpose. Who am I? Well, first of all, I'm a mother of two now young adult sons, one of whom has Asperger's syndrome. I'm also an ASU professor of communication studies. I've been at ASU since 1994 until the present, and I consider myself a mentor, as I have mentored many students over the decades and learned from them as much as I have learned from my experiences as a mother. The objective of this presentation is to discuss the existing models of disability and also to offer an alternative model. And the components of this presentation include addressing the idea of a model of disability, what it means, to identify the dominant models of disability that prevail today, which include the medical and social models, to deconstruct the assumptions that are dualistically encoded into these models, and to offer an alternative model that I describe as a therapeutics of becoming. A model of disability is a map. Every map foregrounds and backgrounds phenomena, selecting features across landscapes to represent and emphasize while de-emphasizing other features. Common disability models are framed dualistically. There is the nature or medical model that emphasizes genes, brains, and behaviors, and also the nurture or social model, which emphasizes culture, society, and experience. These models are often framed dualistically. In this presentation, I offer a synthesis, a new model of emergent becoming, which blends body and mind and offers a therapy or therapeutics of becoming that is based on being in time together. And I will explain each of these dimensions throughout this presentation. Let's turn now to examine the prevailing models, which are the medical and social models of disability. The dominant model of disability is the medical model, and the traditional expert biomedical model defines disabilities such as autism to be a consequence of a health condition or disease, disrupting optimal functioning in physiological, cognitive, or affective ways, leading to thinking of disability as individual property and as impairments. This can be described as the deficit model. Biomedical research on autism, for example, draws on the deficit model of disabilities in descriptions of autistic genes, which are believed to drive autistic neural phenotypes, illustrated on the right side of the slide with an image of a brain scan, autistic brain molecules that are believed to be caused by autistic genes, and these molecules therefore are targeted for molecular pharmacological intervention. And then autistic behaviors communications. And the deficit model assumes that if we can just identify the autistic molecular substrates and genes, then we can create pharmacological or some other kind of biomedical interruption to repair or restore what is deficient. And our visualization technologies for visualizing genes and brains are very mechanistic and very deterministic. They represent the autistic genome in this sort of disembodied way, and also in the research quest for the kind of autistic phenotypes and linking them with autistic genotypes. It's very deterministic and very mechanistic. What's missing from the medical model? Well, mind and experience are missing in biological psychiatry, neuroscience, and cognitive psychology. And I can say this both as a scholar who's examined them and also as a parent who has interacted with experts in these arenas. And oftentimes, in fact, most of the time, treatment is reduced to pills or to some specific biomedical interventions. And society and its normalizing expectations are missing from the medical model as well as mind. And the issue of the lack of fit between, for example, kids with autism spectrum disorder and the expectations of rigid school protocols, that lack of fit is often ignored, even though we find that in many cases the kinds of behavioral problems that get associated as autistic deficits actually derive from a lack of fit of the individual and the demands of their environment. Let's turn now to the social model. The social model emphasizes social meanings and institutions that create disability. There is no unified social model, but social asymmetry between the individual with the disabilities and the social dimensions emphasized and explored. And there can be emphasis on the cultural conditions that produce the meanings of disabilities around codes such as disabled. So looking at our cultural symbols and how they produce disability. There can be an emphasis on the social institution that produce disability through their prescribed identities, policies, and practices, which are based on normative expectations, which may have little regard for the diversity of human experience, like the widespread use of fluorescent lighting that can cause seizures and migraines in people with susceptibilities. And also, finally, the social model addresses experiences, the experiences of disability, especially embodied experiences. And on the right side of the slide, you see an example of the social model of disability institutionally, where you have a case of lack of access, lack of physical access, and institutional barriers of access are very common for people with disabilities. For the social model of disability, then this is taken from Spectrum's philosophy for independent living. Disability is neutral, barriers are socially constructed and primarily exist in the environment. Disability is part of the human experience. Anyone can create change, and the goal is to change environments to reduce barriers of access. Imagine a kid on the autism spectrum having a meltdown in the grocery store. The medical model would attribute the meltdown to behavioral impairments that result from lack of serotonin or impulse control, lack of executive functions, whatever. In contrast, the social model might emphasize a lack of fit. And we see the growing salience of the idea of a lack of fit by its incorporation in the World Health Organization's definition of disability as the interaction between the individual and personal and environmental factors. I think that within the social model, the lack of fit hasn't been adequately addressed in terms of the full implications for the individual, and I'd like to emphasize some of those implications because they have direct relevance for my therapeutics of becoming. We see in two images here. One image is of an individual alone on a puzzle piece and reaching towards others who are holding hand and are connected. And this sense of being disconnected is pervasive among many people with disabilities, especially and including children. What are the psychological and developmental implications of this lack of fit? And we have to kind of address the process of identity formation to consider those consequences. And I do that in the right side of the slide with the image of the looking glass self. And the image is of a person, a featureless person, looking into 4 distinct mirrors. And one mirror has the header, how my mom and dad see me. The second mirror, how my girlfriend sees me. How my older brother sees me is the third. And then the fourth is how my ex-girlfriend sees me. Each of these mirrorings represents the ways in which the dynamics of the groups in which we're embedded shape our self-perceptions. For the individual who has a lack of fit, their mirroring emphasizes this lack of fit in a variety of ways as disabilities that are visible in any shape or form tend to be highly stigmatized, and thus the child and then the young adult and then the older adult experiences their sense of self through a dislocating lack of fit, mirrored too often in the communities within which they are embedded. I'd like to offer a side note on the discussion of being disconnected in the last slide, because the solution ain't normalization. By that I mean the lack of fit should not be met with the solution frame of emphasizing fitting in. In fact, we need to reflect critically upon the assumption that the norm is the best. My work indicates that over the 20th century, the parameters of normality became more exacting as new technologies were developed to sort children's growth, intellect, and now emotional intelligence into grids of intelligibility, such as the intelligence test, for representing differences across children in quantitative formats. So rather than emphasizing the restoration of normalcy or fitting in, I urge recognition and acceptance as alternatives that I develop in my discussion of the therapeutics of becoming that I am articulating in this presentation. Having now introduced the dominant medical and social models, I seek to deconstruct them by offering an alternative ontology of becoming and therapeutics of being in time together. We have seen through this presentation how the social and medical models offer selective foci. The medical model emphasizes deficient biology and physical impairment, whereas the social model emphasizes social constraints, access, and social asymmetry. My model aims to integrate bodily, social, and psychic systems within an open systems framework, and that means deconstructing dualisms that reinforce reductionism and mechanism, the dualism between the genome and the environment, and the dualism between brain and mind. And instead, my model emphasizes openness and Gestalt thinking. It also prioritizes experience and polysemy, multiple meanings. That is, we all have very different experiences and cannot be reduced to cognitive or neural phenotypes. My model emphasizes embracing and acknowledging the potentials for becoming, the endless potential for becoming, against atomism and mechanism. And becoming means that we are always developing and always emerging into something new. We are not fixed as particular disability labels. And in my recommendations for pedagogy and therapy, I ask that we especially acknowledge and embrace becoming, and I'll unpack that in the next few slides. In our first efforts to move towards more Gestalt thinking, it's important to recognize that our biological bodies are open systems and they are fundamentally interdependent systems. For example, the human body has 30 trillion cells of its own and hosts more than 100 trillion bacterial and fungal cells, and the welfare of a person's microbiome, the collective term for resident bacteria, plays a critical role in health. And the last 70 years has seen a progressive weakening of these crucial organisms as the various kinds of pesticides and herbicides and fungicides and various other elements in our environment have weakened them. And you can see this image on the right side of the screen, which is from the National Institutes of Health, illustrates the complex biological openness and interdependence of our bodies. So the medical models, mechanism and atomism are really very misguided, because it is by recognizing our biological openness that the avenues for biological optimization of improving our health are multiplied and proliferate. We also need to acknowledge that our biological bodies are made socially. We're already born with familiarity with certain sounds or tastes, and our bodies are already born institutionalized because the cultures of our everyday life are shaped by complex institutional systems. For example, the chronic stress of the workplace and its impacts on pregnancy. So we are born both as biological and social beings, and we are also constantly being reconstituted both biologically and socially across the lifespan. And if we imagine a tree, we can see the tree is composed of both biological and social components, but is not reducible to either. Of course, people with disabilities, because they face more obstacles and issues of access, may face more encumbrances in their avenues for becoming. And this is, of course, where a therapeutics of becoming becomes so important. Let us turn now towards a therapeutics of becoming. In 2021, ASU student Madeline Reyna completed her capstone project interviewing speech pathologists and special education teachers regarding their efforts with kids with communication disorders. Her findings indicated that one of the greatest challenges reported was overcoming kids' anxiety. And therapists and special education teachers alike both reported giving the kids time as a solution to help overcome their anxiety. I'd like to address this idea of giving time therapeutically as part of a therapeutics of becoming. And first of all, I'd like to emphasize that we are talking about a gift, because the ordinary expectations of reciprocity in our encounters with others, of course, do not apply in situations that are therapeutic or pedagogical. We are, as therapists and as teachers, we are giving. What are we giving in giving time therapeutically? First of all, we are other-oriented in envisioning the individual as becoming across their lifespan. So we see the individual not as an inanimate body, a machine-like presence before us, but rather as somebody who is growing, developing, changing. Secondarily, we are reflexive and emphasize intersubjectivity in our therapeutic encounters. In recognizing the other, we recognize their consciousness, not just their development over time, but we see them as a consciousness, not simply as an entity occupying space-time. Recognizing the other and our shared being in time together, and the role of our comportment in shaping the consciousness of the other and their travels across the lifespan, that is the gift of giving time therapeutically. Recognizing their becoming, and then recognizing in our shared being together their consciousness as a consciousness, not just as a kid. Giving time entails joint attention. It is a purposive coordination of attention. It is also an artful and skillful being together, led ideally both by child and therapists. The experience of being together in time-space must be achieved. It is not something that just happens on its own. I love the image on the right side of the slide from Growing Early Minds, where a child and what looks to be a therapist are both pointing out a common object, a star, and they both look extremely happy. And I believe that play is an important way that joint attention can be achieved in non-regimented and client-directed ways. And I really am very a big believer in this play therapy approach for establishing joint attention, because it engages the child and fosters the capacity for a relationship. So I believe that becomes very critical for this therapeutics of becoming, although of course it could be achieved in other ways as well beyond the play therapy. I'm going to conclude now my therapeutics of becoming as a model of disability and as a philosophy of praxis. This therapeutics of becoming entails open systems and emergent understandings of mind and body, the individual and society. It entails, on the part of the therapist or teacher, psychological awareness and respect for the distinctiveness of the other, respect for them as a developing becoming, as opposed to a particular type of being, a label, for example, autistic or whatever it might be, and also psychological awareness and respect of the other as a unique consciousness with all that that entails. And also with this therapeutics of becoming also entailed is an embodied recognition and alignment. That is, we must align ourselves with the other, for example, in joint attention in playful encounters. And through such activities as playful encounters where we coordinate our attention, we achieve this shared becoming in time. And that is a gift which, in a therapeutic and pedagogical context, can provide the sort of psychological support for relational success and for the achievement of particular therapeutic or pedagogical goals.